subscribe, like, comment, because once you step into this story, there's no easy way back out. The sirens were already screaming when the black sedan burst through the red light on 6th Avenue, tires shrieking like something alive and wounded. Midnight rain turned the street into a mirror, reflecting blue and red flashes across the windows of shuttered businesses. Inside the car, Daniel Mercer didn't look panicked. He looked annoyed. One hand on the wheel, the other already calculating angles, timing, exits. This wasn't fear. This was a man watching his equations fall apart. 3 blocks back, unmarked federal vehicles closed in. No shouting. No theatrics. The chase had been silent until now, and that silence was what frightened the officers most. Mercer didn't drive like someone running from the law. He drove like someone correcting a minor error. He took a turn that shouldn't have worked. A construction barrier moved just enough, as if it had been measured earlier. The sedan slipped through. For a moment, it looked like he'd vanish into the city, swallowed by concrete and rain. Then a spike strip loomed across the road. The car lurched, rubber exploding, metal screaming against asphalt. Mercer didn't curse. He didn't slam the brakes. He coasted, guiding the dead vehicle into a narrow alley, headlights cutting out as if on cue. When agents rushed the car with weapons raised, they found him still seated, hands visible, face calm. "You're late," Mercer said quietly, almost politely. That sentence would haunt the case for years. Daniel Mercer was not a street criminal. He didn't fit the mythology of violence and chaos that dominated true crime headlines. He wore tailored suits, spoke softly, and built his crimes the way architects design skyscrapers, layer by layer, stress-tested, elegant. Prosecutors would later call him a white-collar criminal. Investigators knew better. Mercer was something rarer, a strategist who treated the legal system itself as a puzzle meant to be solved. For nearly 7 years, money vanished from places it shouldn't have been able to vanish from. Corporate pension funds, government-backed development grants, disaster relief accounts. Always small percentages. Always buried beneath complexity. When auditors found discrepancies, they blamed software glitches or human error. When regulators circled closer, Mercer moved on, already 2 steps ahead. His victims never saw a gun. They saw balance sheets collapse. Retirements evaporate. Hospitals close wings. Entire towns lose funding overnight, and no one could explain why. The task force assigned to him didn't even know his name at first. They called him the ghost accountant. The pattern was there, but it was buried beneath thousands of legitimate transactions. It took Special Agent Rebecca Lang nearly a year to convince her superiors that the numbers weren't random, that they were speaking. Lang wasn't flashy. She didn't kick down doors. She sat in windowless rooms, eyes bloodshot, tracing money the way detectives trace bloodstains. She noticed something others missed. Mercer didn't just steal. He signed his work. Every breach followed a mathematical rhythm. Transfers occurred at intervals tied to regulatory reporting deadlines. Shell companies were dissolved not randomly, but in sequences that mirrored tax law revisions. Mercer wasn't hiding from the system. He was using it as camouflage. When Lang finally put a face to the pattern, she felt something close to admiration, and then immediate fear. Mercer had once worked as a compliance consultant. He knew every safeguard because he helped design them. He had testified before congressional committees. He had trained the very auditors now trying to catch him. The investigation accelerated. Subpoenas flew. Accounts froze. Mercer responded not with panic, but with countermoves. Whistleblowers recanted. Witnesses forgot meetings. Digital logs corrupted themselves in ways that made forensic analysts question their own competence. Someone inside the system was helping him. Or worse, Mercer had planned for this from the beginning. As pressure mounted, Lang began receiving anonymous emails. Not threats. Corrections. She'd file a report, and hours later, an email would arrive pointing out a flaw in her reasoning, a statute she'd misapplied, a timeline inconsistency. The sender never claimed innocence. He simply demonstrated superiority. Lang showed the messages to her supervisor. The room went quiet. "He's playing with us," someone finally said. "No," Lang replied. He's teaching us. The arrest came faster than Mercer expected, not because he'd made a mistake, but because someone close to him had. A junior associate. Brilliant, but impatient. The kind of intelligence that burns hot and fast. One unauthorized transfer. One traceable device. That was enough. When Mercer realized containment was closing in, he didn't run immediately. He cleaned. He shut down accounts. He erased digital fingerprints so thoroughly that analysts would later argue whether entire financial trails had ever existed at all. By the time the chase happened, the rain, the sirens, the alley, most of the evidence was already gone. Or so everyone thought. In the days following Mercer's arrest, investigators searched his properties. A minimalist apartment, a rented office, a storage unit that held nothing but empty filing cabinets. It looked like the end of the road. Prosecutors prepared a strong but limited case. Without more, Mercer would go away for years, but not forever. Then Agent Lang insisted on one last search. A rural property in Colorado, listed under a dissolved trust. No obvious connection. No financial activity for over a decade. It didn't make sense, which was precisely why she pushed for it. When agents arrived, they found a modest house standing alone against the plains. Inside, everything was clean. Too clean. No personal photos. No clutter. Just a locked basement door. The warrant team broke it open. Behind the door wasn't money. It wasn't weapons. It wasn't evidence in the traditional sense. It was a room lined wall to wall with handwritten notebooks. Hundreds of them. Each labeled with dates, institutions, names. Detailed plans. Contingencies. Psychological profiles of regulators, judges, even prison administrators. And at the center of the room, on a metal desk bolted to the floor, lay a single folder marked with 3 words that changed the trajectory of the case forever. ADX Florence strategy. Because Daniel Mercer hadn't just planned the crime. He had planned the prison. The moment the words ADX Florence strategy hit the evidence table, the room went quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the air itself was holding its breath. Prosecutors stopped flipping pages. Analysts forgot to take notes. Everyone in that room understood what those 3 words meant. ADX Florence wasn't a sentence handed out lightly. It was a destination reserved for people the system believed could not be controlled anywhere else. And Daniel Mercer had been planning for it. The notebooks weren't manifestos or fantasies. They were blueprints. Each one broke down a different environment: county jail, federal holding, medium security, maximum security, charting behavioral patterns, administrative weaknesses, guard rotation psychology. Mercer had studied prisons the way chess grandmasters study endgames. Not to escape, but to dominate the environment. One notebook was dedicated entirely to isolation. Silence, he'd written in precise block letters, is a variable, not a punishment. Agent Rebecca Lang read that line twice. For the first time since the case began, she felt a flicker of something close to unease. Mercer didn't fear imprisonment. He had rehearsed it. During pretrial detention, Mercer became a quiet problem. He didn't argue with guards. He didn't file complaints. He complied with every rule so perfectly it unsettled the staff. He tracked schedules without writing them down. He learned names faster than officers were comfortable with. Conversations that felt casual at first, about weather, family, routines, later revealed themselves as data collection. Other inmates gravitated toward him instinctively. Mercer never asked for loyalty. He offered clarity. He explained how the system worked, why certain privileges disappeared, how minor infractions triggered disproportionate consequences. Men listened. Word spread. Within weeks, information flowed toward Mercer without him lifting a finger. That was when the restrictions tightened. Phone calls shortened. Recreation isolated. Mail delayed. Still, Mercer adapted. He used the pauses, the quiet, the long empty hours to refine something internal. Guards began reporting an odd sensation during their shifts, a feeling of being observed, evaluated. Mercer never stared, never smirked, but his presence lingered like unfinished business. At trial, the evidence from the basement changed everything. The missing money became secondary. The narrative shifted from fraud to threat. Prosecutors argued that Mercer's intelligence, reach, and demonstrated ability to manipulate systems made him uniquely dangerous. Not violent, but corrosive. Mercer listened without reaction as experts testified about his psychological profile. High cognitive empathy. Low emotional attachment. Extreme long-term planning. One psychiatrist used a phrase that echoed through the courtroom: instrumental intelligence without moral friction. When Mercer took the stand, he didn't deny the crimes. He reframed them. Every system invites optimization, he said calmly. I optimized. The jury convicted him on all counts. The sentencing hearing was brief, almost ceremonial. The judge spoke of deterrence, of public trust, of consequences. Then came the words that ended Mercer's strategic advantage. Administrative maximum. ADX Florence. For the first time since his arrest, Mercer's expression changed. Not fear, not anger, but something subtler. Disappointment. As if the system had chosen a move that ended the game too early. ADX Florence rose from the Colorado desert like a concept rather than a building. No towering fences. No visible chaos. Just concrete, geometry, and silence engineered into permanence. The prison didn't announce itself. It absorbed you. Upon intake, Mercer followed instructions precisely. Hands behind his back. Eyes forward. Every movement documented. Every second controlled. The hood went on briefly, not as punishment, but as procedure. When it came off, Mercer found himself in a cell designed to remove variables. 7 by 12 feet. Poured concrete bed. Stainless steel sink and toilet molded into one unit. A narrow slit of a window angled so the mountains were visible but unreachable. 23 hours a day alone. No rivals. No audience. At first, Mercer thrived. He structured his days meticulously. Mental exercises. Reconstructed financial systems from memory. Ran simulations in his head. Markets rising and falling, regulators reacting, entire economies dancing to equations only he could see. He mapped the prison itself, learning sound patterns, airflow changes, subtle timing differences in meal delivery. But ADX Florence did not respond. No one reacted to his compliance. No one punished his silence. No one rewarded his intelligence. Guards rotated without predictability. Conversations were minimal, scripted. There was nothing to manipulate because the system had been designed without human leverage. Weeks turned into months. Mercer began to notice something unsettling. His thoughts, once sharp and branching, started looping. The same calculations replayed. The same scenarios ended the same way. Without new data, intelligence decayed into repetition. He requested books. They arrived slowly, pre-approved, censored. He read them quickly, memorized them, exhausted them. He requested more. Time stretched, then folded in on itself. The prison psychiatrist noted subtle changes. Mercer still spoke clearly, but his sentences grew longer, more complex, as if he were compensating for something slipping away. He began asking questions he already knew the answers to, testing himself, checking for erosion. At night, the silence pressed in. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of consequence. Nothing he thought affected anything else. His mind, once a weapon, now fired into empty space. Then, during a routine psychological evaluation, Mercer said something that triggered a quiet alert. I understand now, he told the doctor. This isn't containment. It's subtraction. The doctor asked him to explain. Mercer smiled faintly, the first real smile anyone had seen in months. You've removed the future, he said. There's nothing left to plan. 3 days later, guards conducting a routine cell check noticed something unusual. Mercer had been scratching markings into the concrete wall, tiny, precise symbols arranged in columns. At first glance, they looked random. But when analysts reviewed the footage and transcribed the symbols, a pattern emerged. They weren't notes. They were countdowns. And none of them ended at 0. ADX Florence did not panic easily. It had been built for men who thrived on chaos, on reaction, on fear. It answered violence with procedure and genius with indifference. But the moment analysts confirmed that Daniel Mercer's wall markings were not random scratches, but structured countdowns, the prison shifted into a quieter, colder mode of concern. Because countdowns implied anticipation, and anticipation implied intent. They erased the markings within hours, grinding the concrete smooth. Mercer watched without protest from the back of his cell, hands folded, face unreadable. When a guard asked him what the symbols meant, Mercer gave a simple answer. Calibration, he said. That word traveled fast. Psychological evaluations intensified. Sleep patterns were monitored. His mail was suspended entirely. Recreation was cancelled. The system tightened until there was almost nothing left to remove. Still, Mercer changed. Not dramatically. Not visibly. But subtly, in ways that unsettled the staff trained to notice everything. He stopped requesting books. He stopped asking questions. He stopped filling time. He began sitting perfectly still. Hours at a stretch. Eyes open. Breathing shallow, controlled. When guards passed his cell, they couldn't tell if he was watching them or looking through them. The silence no longer seemed to press on him. It seemed to obey him. Dr. Elaine Porter, the senior psychiatrist assigned to ADX Florence, had evaluated hundreds of inmates deemed irreducible. Men who fantasized about escape. Men who rehearsed violence endlessly in their minds. Mercer was different. He wasn't imagining action. He was dismantling thought itself. During their final evaluation, Porter asked him a question she rarely asked directly. Do you still consider yourself dangerous? Mercer considered this carefully. No, he said. Danger requires movement. Then what do you consider yourself now? Mercer's eyes lifted to meet hers, steady and clear. Proof. That was the moment Porter recommended indefinite psychological observation. But ADX Florence did not change its routines. It never did. That was the point. Then the first anomaly occurred. A guard on the night shift reported a missing minute on his log. 60 seconds unaccounted for. Cameras showed nothing unusual, just the same static hallways, the same locked doors. The discrepancy was dismissed as human error. A week later, a systems engineer noticed a similar irregularity in internal timestamps. Not missing data. Reordered data. As if time itself had been nudged out of alignment. The investigation stayed internal. Quiet. Technical. No one suggested Mercer was responsible, not openly. After all, he had no access. No tools. No communication. No leverage. And yet, during a routine cell inspection, guards discovered something that made no sense. Mercer had stopped breathing. Not collapsed. Not unconscious. His body was upright, posture perfect, eyes open, but his chest did not rise. Medical staff rushed in, alarms echoing down corridors that rarely heard urgency. They checked vitals. Nothing. No pulse. No respiration. For 93 seconds, Daniel Mercer was clinically dead. Then his heart restarted on its own. No drugs. No intervention. Just a sudden, controlled return. The incident was logged as a medical anomaly. The footage was classified. Mercer was moved to constant observation. But something had shifted irreversibly. Because Mercer had found the last system. His own body. From that moment on, his decline accelerated, not outwardly but inwardly. He spoke less. Less. His thoughts, once expansive, narrowed into a single corridor. The prison could remove stimuli, restrict movement, erase influence, but it could not force him to engage. And disengagement, Mercer realized, was the final act of defiance. Dr. Porter visited one last time. You don't have to disappear, she told him. People survive this place. Mercer looked at the wall where the markings once were. Survival isn't the same as existence, he replied. This prison understands containment. It doesn't understand subtraction. Weeks passed. The months. Mercer stopped responding altogether. He followed commands mechanically, like a program running without input. Guards spoke to him and received no acknowledgement. Medical tests showed cognitive function intact, but engagement at zero. No emotional markers. No resistance. No requests. He had not broken. He had opted out. The Bureau quietly debated what to do with him. Transfer was impossible. Release unthinkable. ADX Florence was designed to hold bodies. Mercer had turned himself into something closer to an absence. Then, during a routine systems audit, one unrelated to Mercer entirely, an analyst discovered something buried deep in archived prison data. A pattern. Not recent. Not active. Mercer's countdowns, transcribed before erasure, matched historical anomalies across multiple federal institutions. Minor discrepancies, dismissed over decades as clerical errors. Time stamps off by seconds. Logs reordered. Processes subtly desynchronized. Mercer hadn't planned an escape. He had documented decay. He had proven that no system, no matter how secure, could run indefinitely without drift. And that intelligence, stripped of freedom, does not disappear. It turns inward. The revelation never reached the public. Officially, Daniel Mercer became another name on a sealed list. Alive, incarcerated, silent. A solved case. But among those who worked ADX Florence, a quieter story circulated. That somewhere in a concrete cell in the Colorado desert, a man had defeated the prison without ever leaving it. Not by overpowering it. Not by outsmarting it. But by refusing to participate. Daniel Mercer died 2 years later. Natural causes, according to the report. No incident. No struggle. No final words. When guards cleared his cell, they found nothing unusual. No markings. No notes. Just a perfectly smooth wall. And for reasons no one could fully explain, several of the prison's internal clocks were off by exactly 93 seconds. They corrected them. They always corrected them. And somewhere between those lost seconds, the system briefly acknowledged what it had taken to build a place like ADX Florence, and what it cost to erase a mind built to challenge it. If this story unsettled you, understand this. The most dangerous criminals aren't always the loudest or the most violent. Sometimes, they're the ones who stop playing altogether. And if you think this was intense, you're not ready for what comes next.